Thank you. Good to be able to speak with you again. We've heard awesome talks all throughout the day. We thought we'd kind of close the day looking at discipleship, what being a disciple truly means. You know, Jesus calls each of the disciples, and he calls each of us to follow him. Come, follow me. And what does that end up looking like? Following Jesus ends up being going where Jesus goes. And what happens to Jesus eventually? Calvary. He suffers, he dies, the cross. If we're following Jesus, that's where we're headed. St. Augustine says, our holy scriptures themselves do not promise us peace, security, and rest. On the contrary, the gospel makes no secret of the troubles and the temptations that await us. But it also says that he who perseveres to the end will be saved. In the account in Scripture in the Gospels of Jesus' crucifixion, Jesus is there hanging, suffocating, suffering, and the account tells somebody calls out, if you're the Son of God, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, save yourself. And I've got to think that in that moment, Jesus must have thought, save myself. You're completely missing the point. I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save you. Jesus asks us to follow him because he's trying to save us. But it's tough, right? It's difficult to be a disciple. So let's talk about the struggle to follow Jesus. That's what I want to highlight. And I've encountered it a lot as a priest, even just over the last 2 years as a young priest. I've seen a lot of struggle in people's lives. People who are struggling in their marriages, people struggling with their kids, with their job, with addictions. Something that's particularly difficult is people who are struggling with the church's teaching on contraception. It's a really tough one. Now, I don't know if it's problematic for you, but I'd kind of like to use that issue of contraception as a springboard to talk about struggle in general. Contraception is a tough teaching. On a basic level, people tend to kind of think, hey, I'm married. What's wrong with this? It becomes even harder when there are financial issues involved, with having more kids, or health issues involved with the wife getting pregnant. Obviously, the church offers NFP, which I totally advocate for. It works very well, but it's difficult, and NFP involves a lot of sacrifice. And I'll sometimes listen to these stories in my office or in confession, and I really feel for people. It's hard for me to see them struggling. And in those moments, I look at my options as to how to respond. And one looks really appealing. It looks really appealing to just say, hey, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. God knows that you're trying. That sounds loving. And as a priest, I want to help people. And in that moment, giving people permission to sin sounds like it might be loving, right? To tell them that it's okay to use contraception, that the church's teachings are outdated, some circumstances are kind of unique, they can just go ahead and do it. Their life will be easier, things will be more comfortable. But then I keep thinking, after that easy, comfortable life, right, that I've now given them, that person's going to die and stand before God. God's going to ask how they spent their life. And based on what I know about God, them saying that they had nice, easy, comfortable lives is not going to be what he really wants to hear. What's the purpose of life? Point of life is to become saints. It's the most basic call. And the church canonizes saints for two reasons. One, probably the easiest path to sainthood, is just to be killed for their faith, right? To be martyred. If someone dies for the faith, it's pretty clear they loved God above everything else. It's clear where their priorities were. It's pretty easy to canonize that person. There's another path to sainthood, and that is by exhibiting heroic virtue. Heroic virtue. And just thinking that through, doing something heroic presupposes a difficult situation. We don't make epic movies about people living easy, comfortable lives. No one would watch that movie. There's got to be some kind of struggle, a fight, something difficult, a challenge, something to be afraid of. So in order for us to exhibit heroic virtue, there has to be a challenge. For any of us to realize our call to holiness, there has to be sacrifice. So if I just tell somebody, it's fine if you use contraception, don't worry about it, have I really helped them? Or did I just deprive them of sainthood? Did I just neuter their ability to show heroic virtue? No one says my father was such a good guy, he had such a nice, easy, comfortable life. They say, my father was a really great man, he did the right thing even when it was really hard, especially when it was really hard. And we get to choose who we are. We get to choose our priorities. What's kind of fascinating to me about contraception is that it's such a matter of faith. Every time we follow the church's teaching on life, we're putting our faith in God, we're putting faith in our relationship with Him, that He has a plan for us. Every time someone uses contraception, we're hoping that it does what it's supposed to do. So it's a pretty simple question. Is your faith in God and His plan, or is your faith in contraception, or whatever it might be? Contraception doesn't care about you, doesn't have a relationship for you, with you, doesn't care about giving you eternal life. Faith in God isn't easy, but at least when you know it's hard, you're doing what's been asked of you. Now, like I said, I don't know if your struggle is the church's teaching with contraception. Maybe it's the teaching on divorce, maybe it's purity, maybe it's the Sunday obligation. Whatever it might be, don't sidestep doing the right thing because it's difficult. Take it head on, because it's your ticket to sainthood. And here's my opinion. The fact that your life is hard is not a tragedy. The real tragedy would be if your life was so easy that it looked nothing like the life of a Christian. The fact that someone's using NFP and not using contraception and struggling in their marriage, that's not a tragedy. The real tragedy would be if your life looked so comfortable that there was no longer room for sanctity. We hate suffering. It's really annoying, it's frustrating, it's bothersome. We're constantly trying to get rid of it. But it actually makes a lot of sense that we have it. Jesus, second person of the Trinity, the Son, became human in the person of Jesus Christ to suffer with us, to teach us how to suffer. As a priest, how can I teach my parishioners how to suffer if I'm not suffering myself? As a father, how can you expect to teach your kids how to suffer, how to deal with disappointment and rejection, if you haven't suffered, if you haven't dealt with those things? If we haven't suffered, we're really not any help to anybody. No one needs to be told how to handle being happy. It's suffering that we need models for. Suffering is what makes me a good priest. Suffering is what makes you a good father or a good friend. My parents like to tell the story of how they were out for dinner one night at this nice restaurant, and they got a call from my younger brother, Brendan. He was probably 7 at the time, and he asked if they had any leftovers they could bring him. And they said that all they had was bread pudding, and they could bring that to him, but they knew he didn't like bread pudding. And he said, I don't like bread pudding, but go ahead and bring it home for me. Put my name on the box, put it in the fridge, which they did. Next morning, my parents come downstairs, and they're surprised to see my older brother, Martin, eating the bread pudding. And they're kind of annoyed, and they told him that they brought that back for Brendan. And he goes, oh, I know. He sold it to me for $5. And I love that story because, one, it's so my younger brother, Brendan, always looking for something to do. But it also, even at his age, he recognized I could eat the bread pudding now, or I could wait and get something better out of it. That delayed gratification is something so good for us to think about. Do we want something temporary now, or do we want something more lasting? C.S. Lewis has this great quote in one of his books. There's 2 characters who are talking. And one character says to the other one, are you going to choose the good? Are you going to choose it? And the other person says, I don't know. I'm going to decide later. And the first person says, no, this moment contains all moments. This moment contains all moments. And that is so true because the past, whatever's happened in your past, in your life, good things you've done, mistakes you've made, it's locked in. You can't change it. There's really not much point in thinking a lot about it, right? The devil often wants us to kind of stay stuck in the past. The future hasn't happened yet. You don't even know if it will happen. You don't know how much future you have. A year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years, you're not sure if you're going to have that. The devil often wants us to live in the future. But God is in the moment. This moment is all moments because who you are is completely defined by what you're doing right now. You could have lived a horrible life, but the last moment of your life, you choose God, you're going to heaven. You could have lived an amazing life, in the last moment of your life, you reject God, then you've lost salvation. The present moment is where God is, and it's all we have. And it's not just about our souls. I think we tend to forget how much our lives affect other people, right? For everyone here, but especially if you're like father of a family or in a marriage, what you're doing, how you're living out your call to holiness is having a huge impact on the people around you. In the call of Matthew, you see that Jesus calls Matthew the tax collector, and then pretty soon in Scripture you see that Jesus is eating with tons of tax collectors and sinners. And you can kind of assume from that, St. Bede says that because Matthew decided to follow Jesus, the other tax collectors saw it and thought, hey, maybe we could follow Jesus too. Like if there was hope for him, maybe there was hope for them. If we're choosing to follow Christ, we never know how many other people are coming with us. And you might end up saving like more souls than just your own. You might end up doing a lot more good than you would think. Whether you're going to heaven or hell, you're probably going with a group. That's what I like to say. The people that you're with, wherever they're going, it's probably where you're going, okay? Heaven or hell, you're probably going with the group. One final point here. Blessed Fulton Sheen, he says it's possible that the Antichrist when he comes, will look a lot like Jesus. He's going to do miracles. He's going to lay his hands on babies. He's going to seem to be peaceful. He's going to talk about loving the poor. So how will we know this Antichrist from the true Christ? Fulton Sheen says, we will know him from Christ because he won't have any scars. The Antichrist won't have scars in his hands or his feet or his side. He won't know suffering. He won't know sacrifice. He will claim the glory of the resurrection, but he won't have endured the suffering of the cross. A couple weeks before Christmas, I was saying Mass at the prison, and it was my first time saying Mass there. Now I do it more regularly. It's really a beautiful experience. But I was really impressed then because these guys have a chapel there at the prison, and the chaplain there allows them to have all kinds of stuff for Mass. They have an altar there and a crucifix. They have like a whole band set up with like a choir. They have all the missals. They have sacristans who come with the linens. Like it was really beautiful to see like how much they were preparing for this Mass, how much they welcomed it. And they even had, because we were getting ready for Christmas, they had a little Advent wreath there. And there was a guy, as we finished the Mass, who was taking everything down. I noticed his hands were like covered in something as he was moving the candles. I said, hey, what happened to your hands? And he said, well, it's Advent. I thought we should really have an Advent wreath, but we only had white candles. So I went to the library and I got some markers, and I colored three of the candles purple. I colored one of them pink. But whenever I move them, the markers don't stick to the plastic, and it gets all over my hands. And I thought, gosh, I have so many more resources and means than this guy. I sure hope I'm using them as well as he is. Really giving everything that he has. Because those marks on his hands, those probably faded after a day or two. But I'd like to think that when he stands before God, those marks will be there. And he won't be the first guy in heaven with marks on his hands as signs of his love. It made me wonder, maybe my hands are a little bit too clean. Maybe I need to be giving more. I want heroic virtue. I want marks on my hands. So I want you to know today that if you're really struggling to do the right thing in your life right now, good. You're on the right track. If you're having to make painful sacrifices to care for your family, good. It's clear that you love them. If you had to give up something to come here today, good. It's clear that you love God. If caring for your kids is really hard sometimes, good. If you're having to deal with an elderly parent, it's difficult, good. Because on the last day, when God asks if your love was authentic, if it was real, if you meant it, you can say, of course my love was real. Look at the scars. I want to close. I noticed we got a piano over here, so I was going to close by playing you guys a quick song.
life, free of pain and free of strife. I used to think that comfort was the goal, but now I know that love doesn't have much worth unless it hurts. Now I want some tears in my eyes, and I want some doubts in my mind, and I want a broken heart in my chest when I meet you. And I want a thorn in my side when I shed some blood for my bride. And I want some dark times that I was faithful through. If it all goes according to plan, I hope I've got some scars on my hands. Well, this is why I'm here. This is why I came. This is why some big promises got made. This is what I thought it'd be when I heard the call. The time to find out if I meant it all. Now I want some tears in my eyes, and I want some doubts in my mind, and I want a broken heart in my chest when I meet you. And I want a thorn in my side when I shed some blood for my bride. And I want some dark times that I was faithful through. If it all goes according to plan, I hope I've got some scars on my hands. When my work in this life is done, when the strife is over and the battle won, I hope the Father looks at me and at everything I've become and says, wow, you look a lot like my son. I want some tears in my eyes, and I want some doubts in my mind, and I want a broken heart in my chest when I meet you. And I want a thorn in my side when I shed some blood for my bride. And I want some dark times I stayed faithful through. If it all goes according to plan, I hope I've got some scars on my hands. Thank you, guys.